You know what sucks? Getting all excited about a new camera you just got just to take it out and get shots that you're not really in love with. Sometimes the camera's to blame. Maybe it isn't just what it was all hyped up to be. But a lot of times, if we're being honest, it's on us. Modern day cameras have spoiled us with so many tools and options that it can be overwhelming, and oftentimes I find it to be that some of the banger shots that we thought we were getting but we didn't was really just because we didn't dial in the right settings. For example, the wrong settings can lose you several stops of dynamic range from your camera's sensor, or leave noise all over your shadows in low light scenarios. Every time a new camera arrives here at the studio, I have to go through the whole settings dance all over again. So I wanted to share with you guys not only the settings that I use for my shots, but also why I use them. I'll be going through this using my R5C, but you can find pretty much most or all of these settings in pretty much any camera that shoots video. Before we jump into these settings though, I want to quickly thank today's video sponsor, Switcher Studio. Switcher Studio is an app that allows you to create high quality live streams and be able to post them to all the major live streaming platforms. Whether that's Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and so many others, you can create stunning live streams with just video from an iOS device. With their platform, you can actually link up to 9 streams of video from iOS devices to be able to have an amazing multicam experience. Not only can you do that, but there are also tons of other pro features, such as the ability to have logos, lower thirds, and even calls to actions on the screen. Switcher Studio is an amazing app for those of you guys who are looking to take your live streams to the next level without adding super complicated extra equipment. Switcher Studio was also nice enough to be able to offer everyone 1 free month of use when using the promo code BWASH. Definitely check out the links down below in the description for Switcher Studio, because if you're looking to do live streams for yourself or even to offer the service for paying clients, this might just be the easiest way to do it. Okay, so let's hop back into those camera settings I was talking about. For starters, let's start off with the different codecs that mini cameras offer. These can be kind of confusing, but it's important nonetheless when trying to get the most out of your sensor. Mini cameras today have different color profiles to choose from, but I personally prefer shooting in log, which is a flatter profile than any of the other standard modes. Shooting in log, or in the R5C's case, the C-Log3, this will record the most dynamic range possible next to raw. C-Log3 specifically preserves the broader highlight retention from the flatter C-Log2, yet it's much quicker to color in post with less noise in the shadows. Many cameras now have some sort of log footage or flatter profile when it comes to taking advantage of these modern sensors. As more consumer cameras now can shoot in 10 or 12-bit recording, more data is saved from the sensor, and log footage allows you to have the most flexibility when you're back in your editing chair. Another option a lot of video-based cameras will give you are different recording formats. Whether that's all-I, IPB, or even RAW, these formats dictate how the camera will write the files to the card after pressing the record button. In the simplest terms, these formats vary the amount of compression on a file. For instance, I usually shoot everything in XFAVC, which is a 10-bit format. This compression format realizes the high data compression rates without sacrificing image quality. Occasionally, I do switch to MP4 10-bit, especially if I want to shoot 8K without dealing with the Canon RAW. After choosing what file format you prefer to shoot in, it's time to decide the resolution and bitrate. Now, some cameras may be limited in how much you can specify some of the recording modes, but others give you options of an interframe or a long GOT bitrate for various resolutions. For the most part, I shoot in 4K interframe, but let's break this down for a second. This can be pretty technical, but simply interframe, also known as all-I, has a much larger file size while being easier to work with in post. Long GOP, or group of pictures, is a highly compressed, but this means that it's going to be more difficult for your computer to process in post. If you can afford the extra hard drives and memory cards, I strongly recommend shooting in interframe. The next step I take is choosing my frame rates. However, is there really any question here? 24 frames per second all day, unless I plan on slowing down the footage in post. I'll keep most of all my projects in 24 frames, but That does bring us kind of to this next major setting, which is your recording modes. Many cameras have different recording modes, such as normal, slow and fast, and even pre-recording. These settings will record your clips at different speeds, but at real-time playback. For instance, if you're shooting something in 4K 120 in slow and fast mode, the clip written is in slow motion to the card. That way there's no need to retime anything in post. And pre-recording is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. The camera is constantly pre-recording just to save those few moments right before you press the red button. This can be helpful when shooting things such as wildlife, sports, or even fireworks. But let's move on from this setting to a setting that I personally wish that all cameras had: shutter angle. In a lot of video focus cameras, you'll find two shutter mode options: shutter angle and shutter speed. I realize that for many people that are coming from DSLRs or even mirrorless cameras, you may not have had the option before of shutter angle, but let me break these down for a moment. Shutter angle electronically replicates an analog mechanism for how video cameras used to work. It functions proportionally to whatever frame rate it is set in, meaning if my shutter angle is at 180 degrees, the camera's shutter will open for the same amount of time that it takes to close in between frames. We often duplicate this effect in cameras without shutter angle by simply doubling the shutter speed to that of our frame rate. Now, I personally prefer setting my shutter angle to 180 degrees because that way, no matter what frame rate I'm shooting in, I know that it's gonna be double that of my frame rate. But let's talk about getting cleaner shadows from your sensor with this next setting. Now, this may take some Googling depending on which camera you have. However, most cameras on the market perform better at specific ISOs when shooting video. These are called base or native ISOs. Keep in mind that some color profiles may have different base ISOs than others, even inside the same camera. So for example, on the R5C specifically, the base ISOs are 800 and 3200 when shooting in C-Log 3. This means that the camera is going to give me the cleanest image in terms of noise and clarity at these ISOs. If you're coming from the photography world, this may sound a bit counterintuitive. Higher ISOs for a cleaner image? Hear me out. When it comes to video, unless you're shooting in RAW, all cameras are processing your images in some shape or form. This includes noise reduction, color science, compression, and so on. Camera manufacturers will often choose one or two of these ISO settings for the best image possible. This provides the cleanest processing. That means you need to choose these very specific ISOs. Meaning if you drop your ISO to a lower than the base or the native setting, you are actually losing highlight or shadow detail. And because of this, you may not be getting the best image possible. So I'd recommend shooting at these base ISOs, even if that includes bringing out an ND filter. Now let's talk about autofocus settings. I realize that this can be tricky and somewhat subjective, so I'm just gonna kind of share my own personal recommendations. Now, when it comes to using the R5C, I leave autofocus frame on whole area, then I enable continuous autofocus. And on this camera, leaving autofocus frame on whole area allows the tracking feature to work on anything, not just faces. For the autofocus speed and response settings, I like to leave these at 0 for most cases. See, for the video focus cameras, they actually tend to have autofocus algorithms that control it a little bit different than the photo-based cameras. When shooting photos, it doesn't matter how the image looks before the photo is taken, but when shooting video, that jolt of focus can be jarring. Setting the autofocus slower in the R5C's case, the default, can better mimic a focus pull. As with all things, there are some experiments that you're gonna need to do in order to find the right mode for you when it comes to shooting on that specific day. For face detect and tracking, I actually change this based on the scenario. When shooting an unboxing, for instance, I don't want the focus to jump to anything that it might think is a face, so I turn this mode off. Whenever I'm talking to the camera, obviously I turn it back on. Now, Canon Cinema line has a specific feature called face only, which will prevent the focus from jumping to the background, even if a face leaves the frame. This can be super helpful when solo shooting because there's no focus hunting if there is no face. Now, I have a bit of a hot take here when it comes to videos specifically. I prefer digital image stabilization to physical image stabilization. See, often IBIS will cause your image to drift when the camera is still or warp when it's moving. And when shooting in a car or a helicopter for that matter, having a locked off sensor will come out looking better almost every time. The digital image stabilization, on the other hand, in most cameras today are using the gyroscope information from inside the camera. And I see that it's just a bonus when it comes to getting smoother handheld shots. But let's move on to every videographer's favorite topic, audio. Almost all cameras will have at least 2 channels of audio that are usually set up in stereo paired modes by default. But if you want to use 2 mics, these channels can be separated in post. No matter which camera I use, I always leave my record levels as manual to avoid the fluctuation of my levels while rolling. For this, I'd recommend plugging in some decent headphones to adjust as needed. I personally don't like my loudest levels to really pass -6 decibels. However, depending on your mic and your camera setup, your mileage may vary. Now the R5C actually has 4 channels of audio instead of just 2. And a quick tip, when I first set up my camera, I wasn't hearing accurate sound from the mics because the camera was actually mixing in the room audio from the built-in mics as default. Unless you're using all 4 channels, I'd recommend that the monitoring channels options in your menus are set to the channels that you're actually recording to. In the case of the R5C, this is channels 1 and 2, found on the last page of the audio menu. You still need to disable channels 3 and 4 in your editor when editing these clips. However, at least you'll be able to monitor accurately when you're on set. Now, this video could last for hours if I really had the time to dive into every little setting of these amazing cameras, especially the ones that they're giving us today. But at least I wanted to walk you guys through some of the biggest changes you can make to getting the most out of your camera sensor. If you're still trying to get out of auto and you found some of these terms to be a little confusing, I'll link my free, that's right, free beginner's guide to shooting video down below in the description. But let me know what you guys first thought about these settings changes. Which one are you gonna change first by leaving a comment down below in the description. Also, let me know if you agree or you disagree, or maybe you have other settings that people should be checking out. You should definitely put those down there so we can all learn together. But thank you so much for checking out this video, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.